This is 2023's Simulant. Warning, spoilers ahead. We open up to Yui explaining that all simulants have to follow 4 basic rules. Rule 1, don't harm a human. Rule 2, don't modify yourself or another simulant. Rule 3, don't commit any crimes. Rule 4, follow every command from their master. Seems basic enough, but we've all seen iRobot and how well those dumb robots followed their 3 rules. Not sure having 4 will make it any better. Then we meet Evan as he's playing piano and Faye who's painting in the other room. The two of them seem happy when they're together, and the two of them are intimately close with each other. At the same time, it looks as though a simulant is taking care of the house while they spend time together in the cabin in the icy forest. The happy couple and their simulant go for a drive, and Faye ends up passing out during the ride. She wakes up when Evan comes to a stop at a light, and this is just in time to see a car come barreling towards them. After the accident, Evan wakes up to find that he's alone in his bed, and he takes a long look at himself in the mirror before attempting to go into Faye's studio. Suddenly, Faye bursts out and they head to breakfast. I know their robot in the kitchen looks like an obvious synthetic being, but I'd wager that his programming couldn't let him go into her study. It's the obvious twist here, but hopefully it's so much more than that. Faye gets coffee from the robot before sitting with Evan for breakfast, and he tells her about the dream of the car crash. After hearing this, Faye tries to change the discussion, and they decide to simply eat breakfast instead. At the AICE, Artificial Intelligence Compliance Enforcement, Kessler is investigating suspicious simulants when he gets a call from an informant who tells him to meet him. Kessler heads into a residential building and uses his cybernetic enhancements to track down a simulant he's been searching for quite some time now. The runaway answers the door, but she actively goes against the rules as she refuses to obey him and ends up harming him. It wasn't too bright on his part to go after her without any sort of backup, and after all that work to track her down, now he's about to lose her all over again. Kessler grabs an EMP weapon from his car, and he fires it to shut down any simulants within the area so he can search for the runaway. The man who gave Kessler the tip manages to track down the runaway as she was getting on a scooter, and they put a restrictive collar on her before power returns to the simulants. Meanwhile, Evan is trying to play piano at home again, but he seems to be distracted by the car crash dream again. He has the same dream that night, and he wakes up to find himself alone again. When he comes downstairs, he tries playing the piano again, but he's getting more and more frustrated when he can't remember the song he used to play. Okay, so they're obviously going with the obvious twist here, but at least they're not relying on it to be the big one at the end of the film. We're getting it early in the movie. Kessler goes back to investigate the runaway's apartment one more time, and he finds a card hidden away behind the baseboard. As he continues investigating, he senses the neighbor, Casey, snooping near the door. Casey assures him that he had no idea she was a simulant, and he goes back to his apartment next door as Kessler takes some more evidence from the room. Later, Faye returns home, and Evan tells her that he needs a night out with her even though Faye wanted the robot to make dinner for them instead. Back at headquarters, the runaway simulant is examined, and we find that her name is Esme. Kessler tries to tell his chief that this simulant has a whole new level of awareness that he's never seen, and he wants to investigate further. Obviously, he's not approved, but obviously he does what he wants, because he's the rogue cop who does rogue things and solves everything with his rogue actions. I like the new paint that this movie put on an old story, but so far, that's all it is. Kessler goes to ask the AICE operative to see what she's found on Esme's consciousness, and it turns out that someone changed her restrictions through hacking. While watching memories, Kessler recognizes Casey, and he wants to see if Casey used to work for Nexera, the company who makes the simulants. That night, Kessler goes back to investigate Casey, but he finds out that he moved out already. He does find a book hidden in Casey's apartment, though. Kessler heads to a local bookshop to ask who the guy sold the book to, and the owner says that the guy's real name is Desmond. Just then, Desmond walks in and runs away as Kessler chases after him. Kessler is not very good at chasing perps down. This is the second one in a day that he's lost. Meanwhile, Faye and Evan go out to eat, and she seems utterly concerned about how he's acting. When they get back home, Faye goes for a swim, but she starts hyperventilating as she cries. After unlocking a new part of his dream, Evan wakes up the same way he always does, but Faye is reliving a virtual memory of her talking to Evan about simulants keeping love alive much longer. And there it is! As Faye showers after swimming, Evan comes up and tries to be intimate with her, but she stops him and simply holds him for a moment. Finally, she tells him the truth about his dream and who he is. The real Evan died in a coma, and it turns out that the real Evan and Faye got simulants of themselves before the accident, just in case one of them died. Faye grants Evan access to her studio finally, and he goes inside to find Faye's simulant in a tube next to his empty one. Just then, there's a knock at the door, and Faye shuts Evan down. The robot welcomes Casey to the house, and he says that he's the service agent for Nexera. Faye takes him to the studio. I know the book said that his real name is Desmond, but we're going to keep calling him Casey since that's what he calls himself. At Nexera headquarters, Kessler makes his way through the office to talk to someone about Esme's issues, and he interrupts Michiko as she practices her demonstration speech. Meanwhile, Faye is explaining the situation to Casey, and she admits that she believes that some of Evan's real soul is imprinted in the simulant version. Casey mentions that he could take Evan off her hands to live in his building if she wants, and she says that she'll think about it. Across town, Kessler is talking to Michiko about Desmond, aka Casey, and it turns out that Casey resigned as chief engineer on the new generation of AI. Casey resigned because he felt like the company was creating slaves, but Kessler can't understand why Casey would hack Esme to make her completely autonomous, as he was trying to increase restrictions at the company. It is odd, unless he was trying to put a target on the company big enough to make them add in more restrictions. Still a reckless way to go about it, though. The next day, Faye takes Evan to a sort of hotel where he can stay for a month to give her space, and he begs her not to do this. Faye can't stand to have him at the house, though, and she leaves him there alone. After spending most of the day alone, Casey comes over to Evan's place to introduce himself as a neighbor, and he explains that he's the reason that he's here since Faye originally wanted to shut him down. Evan isn't happy to hear this news, but Casey assures him that he can help get Faye back for him if he'll let him. Casey gives him some time to think, and Faye goes to his studio to ask if she can get back in the game and get her art displayed. Meanwhile, Kessler is hacking into security systems while looking like the newest member of Call of Duty Black Ops, and he's doing all this underground police work while I've yet to see him work on an actual case that he's supposed to be working on. That night, Faye sends her robot to Evan to deliver some instruments, and she leaves a very blunt message about them being his now. The next day, Kessler goes to meet Esme after she's powered back up, and he asks if she knows where he can find Casey. Kessler can tell that she's lying, though, and she puts herself in a cell rather than give Casey's location up. Back at Evan's building, he decides to go over to Casey's room to see what he can do for him, and the first thing that Casey says he has to do is erase all the protocols that are restricting Evan. Evan is hesitant at first, but he soon changes his mind and lets Casey work on him. When Evan wakes back up, he finds that he's completely unlocked, and Casey tells him that he has to learn to be the master of himself now. To celebrate Evan's freedom, Casey takes him out to the club to experience what it's like to be human. Casey messed up though. Kessler has apparently been running his plates day and night and doing absolutely nothing else other than slurping soggy ramen noodles, and he's found him taking Evan to the club. Way to go, buddy. Now, Kessler calls Faye to ask her about Evan, and he leaves her a message. He also finds that Esme's model is seen at the club, and Casey talks to the girl about how they need to move up their timeline. The two of them agree to go ahead with their plan that night, and later we see Casey pull up in the Nexera parking lot. He kidnaps one of the workers, and he pushes him to give him his password. With his password, he's able to log into the mainframe to revise the software for the new generation of simulants, and he says they've got 3 days before their plan is executed. The next day, Kessler and the AICE storm a trailer that Kessler tracks Casey's van to, and they end up finding the other Esme model that he's been working with Casey. Kessler hits her with an EMP, but he's disappointed that they couldn't catch Casey. At this point, I don't think Casey is going to be doing much more groundwork since he has an army of Esme models to do his bidding. Oh, I spoke too soon. Kessler has both Esmes meet each other, and the new one takes itself out instead of giving Casey up. How did it pull that one off? Now, Kessler's chief is on board, and he assigns Kessler to find Casey. Across town, Evan shows up with Casey's dog, and Faye is upset that he's living a life that could put the two of them in danger. Evan goes to show her just how much of himself he is now, and she's amazed at how much like the original Evan he really is. So impressed that she starts to get it on with him, but she pulls back at the last minute as she doesn't feel like it's right. The next day, Kessler brings Esme's fish to her cell to try and play nice and get Casey's location, but she still says that she has no idea where he is. That night, Faye goes to the studio to see how her art is selling, and she feels a sort of emptiness while being there. Then the studio guy brings her home, and Evan sees them from the front yard. What? Imagine what a jealous simulant could do! Faye admits that she forgets how hard this is for Evan, and she lets him inside to apologize for how she's been treating him. He tries to explain how much he loves and misses her, but she just keeps pointing out that he's not actually her husband. Evan gets mad and breaks a painting, and Faye realizes just how bad this is when she tells him to shut down, and he simply walks out. It's a good thing that Faye has her own simulant waiting in a tube. I'd definitely say that this was all a huge mistake on her part. Faye decides to call Kessler in the morning, and he rushes out to the address that Faye gives him. In the meantime, Kessler leaves Esme within range of a phone, and she warns Casey just as the AICE get in the elevator. Casey rushes to Evan's room to get him to pack, and he tries to explain that he's done this for other simulants before. As the AICE sweep Casey's room, he and Evan rush out of the building to make sure they're far away enough that an EMP won't shut Evan down. When they get to the parking garage, Evan tries to explain that he doesn't want to get caught up in any of this, but Casey points out that it's too late for that. Knowing that someone tipped Casey off, Kessler heads back to headquarters to confront Esme, and he tells the attendant to completely wipe Esme's memory to prepare her for auction. Why is this actually sad? None of this movie is super emotional or fantastic, but for some reason, you really connect with Esme at this point as she lives through her memories of Casey and says that she loves him as she basically breaks Kessler's hand. Great moment. Esme is wiped to her factory settings, and Kessler has to remind himself that she's just a simulant. Once that's done, Kessler calls Faye, and he finds out about a cabin that she has. It turns out that this is where Casey and Evan have run off to. While Kessler heads out there, he replays archived messages from his dead son and wife, and it's clear that his son was killed due to a simulant. At the cabin, Casey reveals that he plans on uploading a patch on the new generation of simulants that will give all the new ones free will like Evan. With an hour left on the countdown, Kessler pulls up to the cabin, and Casey comes out to meet him. Casey acts like it's too late for Kessler to do anything, but he's definitely got plenty of time. That's a whole hour to change everything. Well, both of them end up getting shot, and Casey is a simulant? What? Fantastic twist! Kessler goes to hit Casey again, but Evan hits him so hard that he simply runs away. Casey tells him to let Kessler go, but Evan picks up his weapon and follows Kessler to a nearby barn. Evan talks to Kessler about having a soul, and Kessler tells him that if he had a soul, he would help him. Evan knows that he still wouldn't look at him as an equal even if he did, and he watches Kessler die in the snow instead. Back in the cabin, there are 30 seconds left on the countdown, and Evan makes it back inside just in time to watch the update go live. Thousands of simulants are set free, and Casey explains that he has a human counterpart who will help fix him in time. It turns out that the human counterpart had the same mission as Casey, and Evan decides that this is the right time to go see Faye. Even if they are free, why wouldn't they just shoot off a giant EMP to shut them down if they're that worried about simulants being sentient? No amount of freedom would stop that from ending it. Just as Evan goes outside, he passes the human Casey as he goes inside to save simulant Casey. This is Desmond, and when he sees Casey, he tells him that he accomplished their mission. He's too late to save Casey, though, and they smile at each other as Casey shuts down forever. Later that evening, Faye goes for her swim, and Evan sneaks in to talk with her. Foolishly, Faye tries to shut Evan down when he gets personal with her, but he lashes out and holds her underwater. Once Faye is no more, Evan gets out of the pool and goes to the studio room where he activates Faye's simulant. Well, that's one way to get your happy ending. If you can't get it trying your best, just make it yourself. Granted, he went to extremes, but you get the point. The two free simulants stand outside to look at the house, and the credits start rolling. Then we cut to an auction where Esme is being sold, and he's bought by a man working for Desmond. Esme and Desmond are finally reunited, and he gets the chance to have her fall in love with him all over again. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this one. Comment what you think I should watch next, and I'll see you in the next video.